is this.
Yeah.
Look at you. No, it's just for swearing. It is a special. Interesting and all the good things.
Well, your eyes, but I could have figured out.
Morning.
That's great.
Well,
I was like,
that's okay. That's why I
I
said.
have some horrible news.
Oh,
my. We're so excited.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
It's another issue about
Really
life.
close. What are we doing? What food are we gonna make?
Let's go. Yeah, I'll look at it.
Hey, I loved it.
Information is power, right?
Hey, that's what
Accurate.
I mean, I did too.
Yeah.
That's very
20 years ago, we should have said,
We don't have any questions.
yeah, I know, I don't like
I said it to you.
So does the NJA work good?
I learned. Water, listen, do you know, you're getting 100%.
See, that's why originally Ted told me we were gonna get a lot of this given, but when we had our first meeting, they're like, oh, you have to.
Call that up. You're that long, you get 100%.
Sewer pipe?
No, this was only on water distribution.
Oh, okay.
But that's okay, no, we'll take it, because we can take that as part of that call. All right. Hey, all right, I'm calling it, it's 5:01, we're calling this workshop to order. All right, people. All right, Leslie, you want to run your last workshop, or shall we let Stephen muddle through this?
Should I talk slower to drag it out?
Really, you have to drag this out?
So, we'll hold this as a joint thing. So anyway,
Okay.
so I just want to say, this is an introduction because changing fees is no light topic. And you know yourselves that you'll have all kinds of people in here complaining about fee changes. So this is something that's got to be thoughtful and everything. So what I'm intending tonight is we're just talking and kind of gives Stefan a feel where you're at on fees. So I think deciding what your concept is going to be is important. You know, I think Stefan and I are both from the school of thought that you recover your full costs with your fees. The problem with that is that sometimes that puts the fee in a high category. So people have a hard time with that. And so a lot of small towns, and you'll notice on the survey that I did, like I think Yuma, their fees are really low, but I also think Yuma must have another revenue source because they pay their employees really high wages.
Where are they?
They're in the Eastern Plains.
Oh, they're probably got oil and gas.
Yeah, and so when you see a town that has really low fees, they are subsidizing those fees. That money, it's not that their cost is low, it's that somehow they're able to subsidize that. So the big highlights is that you're going to see astoundingly high tap fees that I'm recommending. I think you might even want to go further, that you might want to have a tap fee study done to determine what your tap fee should be given your capital improvements. And now's the time to do it because that way it'll be in place when you can start selling taps again. And I think you can consider that, you know, tap fee would be, the new tap fee would be for new development. And the balance is always that it's going to add to housing prices. So, but you know, you also have to build new infrastructure. I included some impact fees because you've got 50 to 70 years of deferred maintenance, you might want to consider impact fees as a way to bridge the gap for the money that you didn't spend in the past, but they also add to housing costs, so that you're always, trying to balance that. For impact fees, Nick will tell you that you have to do a study first. And Nick's going to talk after me, he's going to tell you kind of the legalities of setting fees. Your land use fees look pretty good. The only problem with them is that we're not charging what we have in our fee code, because it says $500 for minor subdivision plus actual costs, and we're not doing that part. So you're not recouping by a cost. And let me tell you, I've spent a lot of time on land use stuff. And then, a final fee resolution, one of the problems I had with it, you have 2 fee resolutions. And the first one was not rescinded when you passed the second one, which is going to be a problem that we're going to have to try and fix over the next 6 months. But I would like to see a lot terminology that's standard terminology, because there's sometimes I have no clue what that fee is that's listed in your fee ordinance. These are just things I noticed when I went through everything. And then we need your direction. So what my plan today is that Nick is going to talk to you overall about fee setting and kind of the principles, legal principles behind fees and rational nexus and all that stuff. I'm going to have Matt talk about his fees. And I'll talk about what I'm recommending for fee increases, and then Dan talk about building fees. So.
All right, Nick, I guess you're up.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Leslie. So yeah, I just wanted to start with a general overview of fees under Colorado law. And under Colorado law, the primary purpose of a fee must be to defray the cost of services to those who must pay the fee. So further unpacking that, a fee has to be intended and designed to benefit those who must pay it. And that's called the sufficient nexus, and that's what Leslie had referenced. But that doesn't necessarily mean the fee needs to be levied only on those who will benefit from the service underlying the fee. But there has to be a sufficient nexus that it's designed to benefit those who are paying it. So if somebody's paying it who's not going to benefit as much from it, that's okay, so long as it's really intended and designed to benefit most of those who are paying it. And a charge doesn't need to be levied only on just those who benefit from the service levied under the fee. So I guess I'll use an example to show that. There was a case, really the seminal case in Colorado, having to do with fees versus taxes. And there's a lot of case law out there because, of course, taxes have to be passed by voter approval. Yes.
Stop for just 1 second. Ruben, can we get the Zoom up on the TV screens? Thank you. That helps the board a lot. Thank you. All right. Go ahead, Nick. Sorry.
No worries. Were you not able to see me?
We're on the wall and not up here.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. Yeah, so I guess I was saying that a tax has to be approved by the voters. And the difference between a tax really is a tax is intended to benefit the town's overall bottom line, and it can go towards the payment of anything, whereas a fee really is intended to really offset services provided to a specific subset of people. And so the other issue that we unpack when looking at fees is that the fee amount has to be reasonably related to the cost of the benefit rendered. So that was basically what Leslie was saying. The rate of the fee cannot unreasonably exceed the costs of the services the fee is designed to defray. Most fees don't require mathematical exactitude, and the courts have really just looked at it as a reasonable calculation. If you can support the fee on a rational basis, the amount of the fee on a rational basis, it will likely pass muster. So tonight isn't going to be an exercise of advanced math, but we do have to consider the calculations that Leslie has come up with. And if you would like to go with a different calculation or a different amount when it comes to fee setting, you have to come up with a reason to do that. So from a legal perspective, fees should be set at amounts no higher than the costs the town incurs in providing a service. But from a policy perspective, this is where Leslie was talking about subsidization. Fees should be set at amounts no lower than an amount to defray the cost of the service the town provides. Otherwise, you are engaging in subsidization. And I think subsidizing is something that some municipalities do, but that is really a policy matter. And most municipalities are of the mind that services should be offset by their fees. So Leslie spoke briefly about impact fees. Those are a specific subset of fees that a municipality can require, and they're specific to new development. So when new development comes in, they're going to bring new density. They're going to bring all sorts of new impacts to the town. That's why they're called impact fees. And the fees are designed to cover costs that the municipality might incur in new capital expenditure. So let's say a large development comes in and the town is without parking. The town's going to need a new parking garage. If the town has an impact fee on the books that can show based on the amount of anticipated development and the impacts of this development, that it's going to cause the town to have to go through this additional capital expenditure, then the town can charge that impact fee. And it's usually based upon, it's some calculation that's based upon the anticipated development, whether it's parking, whether it's increased amount of people coming in. You can definitely see why an impact fee would be justified. I've seen impact fees for street and roads, that type of infrastructure, water and sewer. I've seen them impose for increasing library services, everything, the gambit really. But like Leslie said, there does have to be a study to support those. So those were the fees that I came ready primarily to talk about. But if we wanted to get into more specific fees, and if we do during this conversation, I'd be happy to talk about some more specific types of fees as well. But I think that that general discussion of fees at the beginning is pretty sufficient to cover what the board's going to talk about tonight. And then if the board did want to entertain impact fees at some later date, we could certainly discuss that further. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Mary.
Hey, thank you, Ned. All right, where did we want to go next?
I'd like to ask Nick one question. Nick, I noticed, when I put together the list of towns that I surveyed for their fees, I kind of do a little demographic analysis and pick towns that are similar population and similar economies. And some of them were so wide apart that do home rule municipalities have the ability to set higher fees in some instances than statutory towns?
Leslie, I don't think so. I haven't looked at that specific issue, and I think if they did have that ability, I would know about it because we do serve a lot of home rule municipalities as well. I think the difference between home rule and for these purposes, the differences between home rule and statutory municipalities is that statutory municipalities have sometimes less authority in the statutes and are bound by the statutes and cannot offer certain services. So home rule might have more services that they're providing and thus a greater amount of fees. But I can't say that I know a reason that home rule municipalities specifically would have higher fees on average than statutory municipalities.
I particularly noticed it in liquor and marijuana licensing. I thought those licenses might be capped, but there were a couple of towns that charged much higher licensing fees than I saw the other towns, which tended to be all in the same range. So I couldn't figure out why that was.
Oh, that actually is a good point. So so in the case of liquor licensing, the towns and cities, local licensing authorities are typically bound by the statutes. When, like with liquor authority, the state has preempted the field essentially, and then given localities certain authority that is carved out of that preemption. So when it comes to that, the fee setting for statutory municipalities is actually written into the statutes and they're bound, whereas home rule authority, home rule municipalities can exceed those fees in that case, because we're talking about the state having set the fees at the outset. So that's why you see it in that instance.
Any other questions for Nick? Yeah, trustee Knudsen?
Nick, I don't know if can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
When you mentioned the parking garage, I was thinking of a situation where we have a development of 300 units or something like that coming in versus spot development where there's a house here and a house there and a house there. And the impact fees, can they be adjusted based on the size and the impact of the individual development proposal?
Yes, absolutely. And that is what a study would achieve. They'd assess all of those variables, and it's a really detailed analysis typically where you're looking at the size, the scale of the development. And, I think in general terms, the best way to think about it is the greater the impact, the higher the amount that they pay pursuant to whatever the town or city has enacted as an impact fee.
Yeah, trustee Smith?
I just have another question on impact fees, since so many towns probably have them. Is there already a boilerplate study skeleton that you would use to do an impact fee study in this little town?
I'm sure there's something out there. Typically, I've seen municipalities outsource that work to a consultant. And I think that that's sometimes a more objective way to do it. Somebody comes in with an eye for the types of things that they're looking for in a town or a city and evaluates it from that third-party perspective. But I'm sure there are templates out there, or even in looking through other municipalities' packets, you would be able to find some samples of impact fee studies. Of course, you'd have to plug in different numbers and I guess plug in the special considerations of the town of Paonia into that. So one of the keys in impact fee law is that the study has to be defensible, right? So if you have that third party who prepares the study, they have a contract with the town. They're required to, in most cases, indemnify the town or the city. They will defend that study for you. So you have that benefit of that added buffer, and you're not stuck defending your fee every time you have someone come in and challenge it.
Yes, Ms. Guzman?
So impact fees is something I have a whole lot of experience in, but not in Colorado and California. When Proposition 13 passed, we had to switch our whole revenue income in municipalities to impact fees to pay for capital improvements because we lost property tax. And the thing about impact fees is they have to be applied consistently, but you can figure out a structure that makes sense. So I'll use the example, I wrote actually an ordinance for the city of Oceanside that became the state model for impact fee ordinances. We had a beach impact fee, and I won't go into why our beach costs us a lot of money, but it has something to do with Camp Pendleton. And if you, like, the way I wrote it is, if you were developing within a mile of the beach, you paid a higher fee than if you were developing 5 miles away from the beach. So you can put those kinds of things in, for instance, for you with water companies. You're serving that water company on different lengths of water service lines. So you could create a higher impact fee for something that had more expensive infrastructure to serve it that you would have to replace than less extensive. But it has to be applied to everybody that has those same circumstances equally, if that makes sense.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, thank you. All right, where to next?
So Matt is gonna go through his fees.
Okay,
Yeah, I'll keep this short, with an hour to work on, really the fees, the only reason we're looking at upping some of them is based on some of the surrounding communities around us, and then just the cost it is to provide some of these services. You know, fines and fees obviously is explained a little different, but for us, you'll notice right atop that list, that regular bin inspection, we charge $10. The target we'd be looking for on that would be right around 25. The reason for that is when we do a bin inspection, the guys go out, they have to look at the bin, they come back in. We're still operating on the old Spillman system, so we have to radio that bin in to get it checked. They complete the paperwork, give some of the paperwork back to who wants the bin inspection. On top of that, our guys write a report on that. So it becomes not an extremely long process, but there are a lot of steps to it. And that $25 is about what an hourly rate, that's about an hour's worth of work for our guys. That's kind of what we're setting at. Certified bin inspections currently sit at 25. We would look to move that to 50, but we don't currently do a certified bin inspection because we don't have a certified bin inspector. So, you know, that rate will need to be raised at some point, probably, that fee. But we can raise that up, and that'll help offset the cost of sending somebody to training to become a certified bin inspector. A few of the others, the animal at large, the reason it's highlighted on the list is because we have dog off leash and animal at large. Those two kind of cover the same thing. One of them is a mandatory summons into muni court. That's going to be dog off leash. Animal at large is a fine, the first offense, fine the second offense, and then a summons into court. So what we would be looking at doing in the future would be to combine those two and keep our fee structure. It's not that that's the 5,100 summons. That's reasonable for what forward. That seems to be fair. Really, that's highlighted just to point out that there are several places here where we have, you know, two codes, two muni codes that kind of overlap each other, but they have different outcomes. So that's kind of what we're looking at on that one. A few of the others we just highlighted basically because we're kind of below the benchmark of communities our size and what we're dealing with. The littering, we're about $50 off on that one. The harassment's different. The harassment's highlighted because our first step in harassment would be $100 fine as opposed to most places on harassment. It's going to be a summons and a given what's involved with harassment and the investigation that goes into it. You know, putting that person in front of the judge, kind of explaining why we're here and what we have going on tends to make more sense than simply writing that $100 ticket. You know, so there's some of those we would look at. Disorderly conduct's the same way. You know, we write that fine, and that works in some scenarios, but there's other scenarios you'll notice they're going to do a summons on that right away because it's simpler for us to explain to the muni judge, this is what we have, this is what happened. The business owner gets to kind of take part in that depending on the damage we have.
What page are you on?
Oh.
Which page are you on? Page 2 of the.
Yeah, with my handout, it kind of got jumbled up in
It's the first, on that PDF, it's the first set of
Court costs looks like the advantage.
Okay, thank you.
Anywhere on the second page of that.
And Matt, if I might just chime in really quickly. So Matt, I wanted to make a distinction for the board. Matt has referenced some fines here, and fining authority is a little bit different than fee authority. Just so the board knows, fines for municipal ordinance violations are allowed to be set up to $2,650 per violation, and each day of a continuing violation constitutes a separate violation. So typically municipalities don't go up that high unless there's a particularly egregious violation or ordinance violation on the books. You wouldn't see a fine go up that high, but the code does grant that authority of up to $2,650 per day of the violation. So that's the authority we're working with here.
Yeah, and kind of to dovetail on that, you'll notice section 1420 of our meeting code, the general penalty for violation, outlines that $2,650, and that's when we summon somebody to meeting court. That's kind of what the meeting judge, that's the bracket the meeting judge works in. So you'll notice a lot of the stuff on this list is summons. That provides a meeting judge some area to work with. But it also becomes somewhat resource intensive for us if we're writing a lot of these things that could be fines that are paid. They understand, hey, I violated this code, got a fine, I paid it, as opposed to, yeah, I know that's what you want to do, but can't we do that right now? This is a summons in the court. You have to go up, you have to show up, tell the judge, you want to go to so. But by that time, we've already brought the meeting judge up. We're here, getting stated, so on and so forth. So, yeah, that's kind of where some of those come from, the fines versus fees. And then I'll take just a minute here to touch on, since this is going to be short for me, but a few of the codes, like I said, we have some that overlap that are confusing. Our nuisances, our weeds, our junk. We have this process where there's some language in the code that says even if we observe an infraction, a junk infraction, that's not enough. There's some language in there that says and. So when we see and, that means we have to have two things. And a written complaint from a citizen. So it wouldn't be enough for a code enforcement guy or an officer to see that. We would also need a written complaint from a neighbor or somebody else was walking by. That is confusing at times because we obviously have an infraction. We typically wouldn't want to tie that to an and. Well, we don't have a complaint on it from anybody else. So, because I think the general thinking from the citizen of the community is, hey, if it's on the books, it's going to be enforced. I don't need to continue to come in and write a letter and drop this off. If this is a problem, fix it. So that's something we're looking at, and kind of our thinking on that would be, we would send out a letter under this nuisance, weed, or junk, depending on how we word that. We would send out a letter. Currently, the way we have it is after 20 days, if that hadn't been fixed, then we would write them $100. From there, then we're kind of split whether we would go to 250 or we just want to write them a summons in the meeting court and they can explain. The process we have now is they can appeal that, and they set up a schedule, they set up a time to come meet with you guys, then we have an agreement. There's also some wording in here in a certain part of this where they actually enter into an agreement with the code enforcement officer as to how long they have to fix it and what it's going to cost. That's a little unorthodox. That's not really what we're doing, especially if we have our officers acting as code enforcement. We don't really want them out there entering into agreements with somebody over how long they have and how much it's going to cost. We don't want that. So, that's kind of something we would be looking at. And I mention this because here in the fall, we'll be bringing the actual words on some of these to you guys. But I thought I'd take this time to explain why when we bring those, there will be certain dollar values or summons attached to those, and why we want to clean some of those up once they get here. Couple of the others we don't have that we would be looking at adding. We don't have a camping ordinance right now. So it says no camping in the park, but we don't actually have anything about that. So we have a few other towns we've worked with on some camping ordinances. We would be combining some dwelling and some camping restrictions. We would attach fines with that. The thing that we wanted to make sure on that was, we don't want to be fining people when they have grandchildren or their children and friends camping in the backyard. So finding wording that, you know, kind of carve that exception out is what we look for, but we'll be bringing that as well. Inoperable vehicles, another one we have with vehicles that are inoperable in essence, that are parked all over town. What we would like to do is something similar to our junk weed ordinance, where that would be perhaps a letter to start with, or a verbal warning, and then it'll be $100, $250, and move up from there. We're putting that together now, so we'll be bringing that to you as well. We don't have anything. The other thing we'll tie into that is some vehicle registration issues we have all over town. We have to write those into county, but a lot of municipalities have some new codes where they're writing that into the muni under an operable vehicle, so that revenue stays in town. We just got to perfect that a little bit. We're not quite there. Fires. We don't actually have a fire ordinance that restricts the burning of stuff. We have something under nuisances with noxious gases and smoke, but it doesn't actually address fire itself. And given the past 20 years, I think it's important that we have something on open burning, burning of trash. The ordinances we're looking at will, again, carve out some exemptions for, you know, fire pits. I know it's real popular right now, the brick pizza ovens in the backyards and things like that. They're kind of ahead of the curve on that. So we'll be bringing that. But again, when we do that, the fines associated with that will be something along the lines of, depending on the situation, you know, if it's a family reunion and they're simply not aware of the code, maybe it's a verbal warning. But if it's a house we've been to before, we've explained to them, and we have our body cams on, and there's obviously a fire in the backyard on the ground, with everything else going on, or a couple feet from the neighbor's fence, we want to be able to write a fine for that right now, that they can pay. If they don't like that, then obviously you always have the option of coming to municipal court. So those fines are put on that as well. And the last one I'll kind of hit on is, this is a fee, but registering our sex offenders is another one. The first time they come in, it's a fairly lengthy process. We go through to get them registered. They use a department computer to fill all that out. Then we have to submit some of that and verify it. And then on top of that, we do sex offender checks where we go to the residents listed to make sure that's where they're actually living. What we're looking at right now would be an initial registration fee. So the first time they move to town, they're required by law to come register with us, around $25. About the same as our van inspection, because it's going to be about an hour's worth of work by the time we verify identity, have them do their portion, and then our guys come back to the department or stay in the department and write their report. Then each quarterly check, or depending on how often their checks are, typically it's quarterly, just that same $25 fee, as opposed to we're simply doing that because we're statutorily obligated, but there's no payment. And that's, again, that's not really a fine, that's more of a fee for doing the service that we're doing. You guys got questions on any of that?
Questions?
Yes, so that is gonna be paid by the offender?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, that would be paid by the offender. And our, what I'm thinking on that is, you know, if we were to do something like that, obviously, we have the addresses, we would mail them a letter and say, if we were to do this, obviously this wouldn't take effect until January 1st, 2024. That way they know it's coming. It's not, hey, the first time they come in, bam, they're here with $25. And that would be something similar on a lot of these. You know, I can't find anything that restricts the number of dogs you can have in town. We have a list we have a list, you know, with our poultry, you know, you're allowed to have 12. But under our animal at large statute, fowl is a part of that by definition. And so if the chickens are in the neighbor's yard, it's an animal at large too. But we don't actually restrict how many dogs they can have. So we'll be bringing that one as well. And there'll be a fine associated with that too. But that'll probably be household pets, more of a dog and cat thing, but we have several houses around town that are a lot of dogs.
Questions, trustee Peterson?
What about, when the animal has to be held in a facility overnight? That $50 doesn't seem to recoup the cost because the officer has to drive it whenever it's considered up.
Yeah, so where we're at with this right now is Royce Hurst is operating a shelter in Delta, but the shelter, my understanding, is owned by the city of Delta. City of Delta, Delta PD, and the Delta County SO cost share on that to place dogs in that. We used it a single time because we didn't have an option. The dog was placed in this town hall after hours, and we don't have anywhere local to place it. So we made arrangements to take the dog out. The dog's held there for 5 days. After 5 days, it's taken to Grand Junction to put up for adoption. In this case, we are responsible, since nobody picked up the dog, for the $125 fee of holding the dog. $25 fee. If to recoup that fee, if they don't pick up the dog, is not gonna happen. Now, when we take them down, if there's nobody there, they have 10 spots. The 10 spots are occupied, bring the dog back, and then hang on to it for a little while until they get an opening. But if they have staff there and they're available, they'll scan the dog to see if they have a microchip or an ID. So we can try to identify that. We've had several instances where we have found dogs that the guys recognized who they were, and we sorted that out with citations all at once. But after speaking with the other two entities involved with Royce Hurst, Delta is on board with us using that facility, but we were going to have to cost share that as well. So they're going to get back to me on the cost and the agreements on that, but I think it's running somewhere around the area about $3,000 a month to operate that facility. With 10 spots, the other thing would be where do we, if we're divided 3 ways, are we guaranteed 2 or 3 of the spots, or are we bought on the totem pole, but we're still paying 33%? I mean, these are all things that have to be hashed out. But I know that we're working on this before I got here. We continue to work on it. This is kind of the best solution we've come up with right now. That being said, it doesn't mean it's actually going to work. It may not be cost effective for us to load a dog up, take it down there, pay the $125 every time on top of the monthly fee we may or may not make use of. But I'll keep you updated on that as we go. When I get the final answer on that. But yeah, the animal at large doesn't take into account holding costs because we're not really set up to calculate those costs yet.
Yes, trustee Smith?
And I'm sorry to step out, this might have already been asked, but in a previous resolution, I think it was the 2015 one, these police fees were included with the town fees, and then they were separated out for the 2019 resolution. So my question is to Nick, can they all be in one resolution, or do the police fines have to be something separate?
So I think, yeah, that's a good question, Trustee Smith. I think they could be all in one resolution, but they could also be separated out. I think a good reason to separate them out might just be for a reference point. You know, you have one document that you're looking at for purposes of when you're thinking about fines, and you have one document to look at when you're thinking about fees. So my thought would be to look at the code and specifically reference where the authority to set these fines is. And the authority of most of the fines, of all of the fines that Matt is talking about, is in the general penalty clause. So that resolution could specifically, if it were separate, could specifically reference that portion of the code. So I don't necessarily have a preference. We could do it either way. But that one document reference point might persuade the board to think of putting them in separate resolutions.
Anything else? Yeah, Trustee Knudsen.
This is regarding the junk ordinance. If I read it right, at the very end of the process, if they hadn't cleaned up their junk, the town can actually bring a curb in, clean it up, and put a lien on the property. Does that still exist?
So there are several parts to that ordinance. The conflicting part to what the part you read
Yeah.
is that if we clean it up, there's a section there that says we're to hold it in a safe spot for up to 90 days. So, yeah, so this is where the junk nuisance ordinance is like this monster with all encompassing things. It's very difficult, whereas, you know, as I'm sure you guys know, law enforcement's they like the black and white answers. This is the code, this is what is happening, this is the fine. That does not apply. So, yeah, and again, there's conflicting things in it. You know, there's parts of it where it's required that the town administrator deem that a nuisance before anything can happen. Well, that requires her or him to go out and look at it. Like, I'm sure they have other things to do besides, you know, yeah. And then we add on top of that, that maybe no one has actually submitted a formal complaint because it says in here that anonymous complaints will not be accepted. So if we don't formal complaint, do we actually go look at it or do we not? Do we enforce it? So yeah, I think here as we progress through the year, you know, hopefully Stephanie and I now will be looking at some junk nuisance ordinances that are a little more, you know, pared down. And I wrote in my notes, just streamlined. We have to simplify those a little bit. And I'm sure we'll be leaning on Nick for that too. Yeah, that one gets, and again, it doesn't lay out what are the costs for that. Where do we store it? Does it have to be covered? Does it have to be monitored? Does it, I don't know.
Don't you have to inventory every single piece that you take? This is
Yeah.
a crumpled sheet of paper. There's another crumpled sheet of paper.
Yes. So and I know, I'll just have this one last thing. I know there's some frustration in the community about weeds and junk and nuisances. I get it. I absolutely do. I understand it. I'm just trying to point out, that's not as simple as going to the house, knocking on the door and saying, hey, you got a lot of weeds, you got a lot of junk, here's your fine. You know, I would like this to be much simpler, clean this up as well. So we'll, so whoever's watching, we're working on it. We'll try to get a solution in place because I know that is something that we should be able to fix.
Trustee McGinnis.
Speaking of solutions, I'm looking at this structure, I'm actually curious about our current structure of code enforcement. You know, using our everyday officers to do that and not having one or two code enforcement officers. And I'm curious about, you know, do we know if other municipalities around our size do that? Is that something that's kind of has precedent for? Do we want to change that system as well? Because I think if we do, then looking at some of these fines as covering the cost for the man hours, then that would change a lot of the structure if we had a code enforcement officer or two. So I think, yeah, conversation around, you know, are we happy with how we're enforcing code right now kind of shifts some of the numbers we're seeing here.
Yes, Ms. Kuzma.
So this is a little off topic. I think we want to stick with fees because we're already more than a third of the way through and we haven't even started on the biggies. But generally speaking, you don't want to have police officers doing code enforcement. And what I talked to the board about before is with the next budget, putting some money in there to hire someone on an hourly basis as needed to do code enforcement. Because I had to do code enforcement and then we had this one case where we would have, if the complaints had continued, we would have had to surveil and talk about not having enough time. Plus, I like to sleep at night, so I didn't want to sit outside with my car. So that's something though that I think with the budget you should talk about is how you're going to do code enforcement, because right now there's not any good options, and you don't want to pay your town administrator to do it
Yeah, that's not.
unless it's like takes 5 minutes. But there's not all of those take 5 minutes.
Okay, any other questions for Chief Lemon? All right, seeing none, I guess we are on to Mr. Reardon.
No, it's going to be Leslie. Well, we do Mr. Reardon first, then I'll do mine, and then we can cut it off at 6:30.
I think you have enough on your plate, you ought to do a 2-week retreat. Leslie's Villa in Tahiti.
These are terrible.
So generally speaking, you know, you've got a fee schedule, which we use for everything. And I think your biggest challenge right now are, number one, establishing valuations so that we have a consistent valuation system to then process these fees. There's, in my opinion, should be flat fees for a lot of things, like a re-roof permit, just a flat fee for a residential permit, a flat fee for a commercial that would be different. And the reason I say that, a residential re-roof, $7,000 is gonna be a $200 permit. So if someone had a $9,000 re-roof, or someone else had a $6,000 re-roof, it's just a flat $200. Make it simple and equitable and that. But commercial, they get dinged pretty heavily. So it's not unusual for a commercial re-roof to be $80,000. What do I got here? A $40,000 commercial re-roof, if we used your fee table, would be $642. And my visits to that site would be probably 3 visits rather than 2 for a residential. So it's just digging them pretty hard. And I think, you know, if you did $200 flat fee for residential, $400 for commercial, you'd come out well, and people wouldn't feel just completely robbed. But the biggest challenges, I think, for you are, number one, violations. Number 2, expired permits. You have nothing to deal with. So I started helping out here in 2017, and I said, gee, Leslie starts a remodel project in her house without any permit. The only recourse we have is to take her to court. Well, what if someone does a re-roof without a permit? You're gonna take them to court? I mean, that is not the avenue, and there is a simple way to do it in the building code. And it was recommended as part of your resolution for your fees. And what we've done in other communities is say, okay, because there's gotta be some incentive, I hope, otherwise people are gonna go, oh, if I get caught, I'll just pay the regular fee. If I don't get caught, I don't have any fees.
Yeah.
So if there's no incentive, that's what's going to happen. So the incentive typically has been, the fine would be equal to what the permit fee would have been, with no guarantee that you'll get a permit, because you may not be able to do what you want to do. But a minimum fine of $100. So some kind of violation penalty that needs to be established. And then for expired permits, we have nothing. And so other communities typically say, if it's been expired for less than a year, you can repurchase that permit for 50% of what it was. There wouldn't be any new plan review fee because the plan review was completed. And then if it goes more than a year, you pay the full fee for that permit. And the way we amended the code when we adopted it, we don't expire permits readily. I mean, we give people lots of room and space. You pass an inspection every 180 days. So you could wait 6 months to start the job, pass your footing inspection, 6 months later, pass your foundation, 6 months later. I mean, you could build your own house in your spare time and make it last 3 years and be okay. No one's trying to expire your permits. But when things just get stalled, you know, we gotta say at some point, hey, nothing's happening here, you've never completed this, you shouldn't be living in the home or occupying the commercial space, whatever. So violations and expired permits are two things that I think we really need to address. The flat fees that I'm recommending are re-roofs, as I said, a mechanical permit if you're doing it under a building permit or a new house, should just be a flat fee because your inspector is going to be going there anyway. And the review of the mechanical system is part of the building permit. So I don't think we should ding them. However, if Dave Knutson has a 10,000 square foot mansion and wants to put in, it's all built, it's done, he's been living there, and wants to put in a completely new HVAC system or boiler system or something, then we go, well, no, this isn't under the umbrella of a building permit. So this is a standalone mechanical permit. We're going to review your plans and issue that based on the value. So demolition permits can be a flat fee, floodplain development permit, flat fee. Right now, you don't call them fence permits, you call them a fence review. I think that's a slick way of saying it's not a permit, but basically you're giving them permission to put up that fence based on the review. You have a flat fee of $70 for that. Solar mount, what, right or wrong, because I feel like we don't want to ding these people too badly. A $10,000 solar system would be $243 for a building permit. There's also electrical, but building is also important because there's uplift and all that stuff. However, there's houses that are putting on $30,000 solar systems. And that permit based on your fee schedule would be $541. And me, or whoever your inspector is gonna take 2 trips there. It doesn't matter if that system is $5,000 or $30,000, it's 2 trips. And so it just seems like, wow, why are we dinging these people? I think a flat fee would be good. And basically what I've been doing, right or wrong, and you can scold me if you want, is I've been saying, okay, a $10,000 system, your permit is $243. And I've been saying, that's what we're going to charge you. And you can see it in the ledgers. If it's less than that, we're going to go by the value. If you have an $8,000 system, we're going to look at your fee schedule and go, oh, your permit's $197, whatever. But I've just been trying to be reasonable with your citizens because I just don't think we want to scalp them for doing something good for them and for the environment. So flat fees, building permit fees, all of that. I've given you 2 valuation tables, and there was a Word document in that link to a file. And you'll see the valuation tables. The one was in 2018, published by the ICC. The other one was in 2021. They do publish these every 6 months. And so a lot of communities say, we're going to establish the value for your project, new construction, based on the valuation data provided by ICC. And you can see how much it changed. In 2018, a new home was valued at $122.46 a square foot. So you take how many square feet by that number, and you come up with a value of $300,000, and then you go to your fee schedule, you go, okay, here's what your permit fee is going to be. I think it's really important to have a standard procedure for establishing values. And John Capel was the attorney for many communities on the West Slope, Uray, Ridgeway, Montrose, Delta, many of them. And I adopted codes with him 3 times when I was working in Delta. And I talked about this and I said, you know, we have homes that are $300 a square foot, and we have some that are really $110 a square foot. So how does this work? How is that fair? He says, we're not looking at fair, we're not looking at exact, we just need a constant, consistent system. So some we win, some we lose. And he was comfortable with that. So a lot of communities just adopt this, as it progresses every 6 months, when I was in Delta, and just like you talked about subsidizing, the town said, okay, this is an abstract number. Who's really building a house for $167 a square foot today? Probably nobody. But it's a number to spit out a value to be able to give them a permit fee. So in Delta, they adopted the 2009 valuation table so that they had something consistent to go by. And even in that table, the houses were valued at $106 a square foot or something. The city of Delta said, we're gonna amend that one piece and we're gonna say houses are $89 a square foot. Okay, you know, it's your choice. And so now you're spitting out a value and now you go to your fee schedule and you go, okay, here's what your fees are going to be. It's just a way of being consistent.
All right, questions, Mr. Broom? Yeah. Nixon?
First of all, the square footage you cited is 14 times bigger than my current house. Secondly, on a serious note, it was very painful to bring our building codes from 2003 up to 2018. It took us years to finally adopt them. So what would you suggest is the next review for this council? Because we've adopted the 2018. What kind of schedule should we be in so we don't get wrapped around the axle on building codes and let it go for, it was 15 years before we re-up.
You don't have that scheduled for adopting new codes?
Yeah, in other words, like, should it be every 3 years? Should it be?
So I am basically in charge of what's called the Western Colorado Code Professionals. And we meet in Montrose once a month. And that includes Gunnison City, Gunnison County, Ouray County, Ouray City, Telluride, Montrose, Delta, all these different communities around here. And we started this process back in 2003, and we met in Ridgeway, and we all said, okay, let's be consistent. Let's all adopt the 2003 code. And then every 2 cycles, in other words, every 6 years, we're all going to adopt the next one. Well, it was like herding cats. So people didn't do it. Cedar Ridge adopted the 2006 right out of the chute and so forth, went haywire. Well, this cycle, when I started with the town of Paonia, I was also working with Telluride, Ridgeway, Montrose, a whole group of other communities. And even though we started in Paonia, you were the next to the last to complete the adoption. Montrose is just now doing it. But again, we tried to say, you know, it's too expensive for communities to adopt this every 3 years because the code books are expensive. Rewriting the ordinance and everything takes attorney time and everything else. So we're all shooting for every 6 years, every other code cycle. And if you wait too long, it's hard to keep up. The other thing is the state of Colorado has new mandates based on basically federal dollars saying, hey, Colorado, if you want money for your highways, you better up the ante on your energy codes. So now the state is pushing that on all of us. And in 2026, if you have not adopted the 2021 energy code by then, you must do it. So in 2026, you're going to be adopting the energy code. You might say, oh, we like that 2018 code, let's keep on it for the next 50 years, but the energy code is going to be a state mandate. And it's trickling down from the federal government. So knowing that that's coming your way anyway, I think the target 6 years from now is a good choice.
Other questions for Mr. Morgan?
Pardon?
Oh, I was asking the board if they had other questions.
And I don't mean 6 years from now necessarily. Remember, you adopted the 18, so the 21's already been published. The 2024 code, they're already doing code hearings to see what's going to change. So it's the 2024 code that we would all hope to go to at the same time, but no one's saying you have to adopt it the day it comes out. A lot of these, they have a first publication, and then a year later, they'll have a second or third where they refine a few things. So it doesn't hurt to adopt the 2024 code in, say, 2026, when you're gonna be forced to adopt the new energy code anyway.
Trustee Markle?
Yeah, thanks. So, it's 6 o'clock now. We have 15 minutes left in our time allotted, right? Okay, so,
Still need to get through all Leslie's stuff.
right. Basically, I want to start with an apology to the citizens of our town, because I initiated this discussion. And my motion originally was to, I forget exactly, but basically to have a discussion about the determination of, project, building valuations. And it kind of snowballed into every single thing, including new ordinances and enforcement and all kinds of crap that's totally unrelated, but I should have known better. So specifically, I'd like to get back to my particular issue that I wanted to raise for this whole thing, which was based on my experience and in my discussions with other people who have had the same experience, wherein if someone chooses to do work on their own building, the valuation for the project is determined not by the cost of the project, but by what the imagined cost would be had you hired somebody. And that is the thing that I am interested in resolving. And I understand that this is at the discretion of the building inspector, according to an email that hopefully everybody saw was sent to us by Lucy Hunter. There's a part in 2018 IBC A 109.3 that the eventually final building permit valuation shall be set by the building official. So unless we make an ordinance, my understanding is that we can supersede that with our own ordinance. But basically, my discussion with Mr. Reardon was, I came up with a valuation for my project, which I determined by the cost of the equipment that I used and the expected time that it would take me to do the work, which he presumed I was using my position as a trustee to estimate my value. But since there's no way for us to say, okay, if someone, and his example was, say somebody does work for their friend, does it for free, but the project is very valuable, he has work to do that is not covered by the fee. And my counterexample is, okay, let's say that in this imaginary scenario, there's a company that has executives, vehicle equipment cost, insurance, office staffing, all these other costs that I'm not incurring. If I'm doing the work myself, am I supposed to pay a fee that's based on all these other costs? So what I was hoping to achieve in our discussion was, let's come up with a way to figure this out that's just fair and predictable. But it seems like we are not going to do that in the next 13 minutes.
We can't make a decision tonight.
I understand.
So,
There wouldn't be a motion, but it seems like the discussion has gone way beyond what that initial scope was. So hopefully it doesn't turn into the furtherance of the tap fee pyramid scheme and the
Mr.
shutting
Markle,
down all
I
the-
would
excuse me,
suggest
Mary,
you watch
excuse
your
me,
language.
excuse me.
Mr. Markle.
Excuse me, I'm speaking. If you would
Mr.
like to
Markle?
speak after I'm finished.
No,
you may do
Mr.
so.
Markle, I have control over the floor, and I'm about ready to take you off the
On
floor.
what basis?
Watch your language. You may not call a tap fee a pyramid scheme.
I certainly may.
Mr. Markle, you are out of order. I suggest we continue on with Ms.
Okay,
Kushnier's
so
presentation. Mr. Markle, you are out of order.
I'm not. I
Mr.
wasn't given a
Markle?
time limit. You're trying to censor what I'm saying.
Mr.
Let me
Markle?
finish.
Mr. Markle,
What?
be quiet.
No. Okay.
Okay,
So-
I'm going to ask the board that you either take a 5-minute limit, that we take a break right now.
There's no motions.
I'm going to ask them to make a motion and to do
You
that.
can't take a motion. You can't
Yes,
take action
we
right now.
can. We can take a motion and leave.
You can shut down the meeting if you want to.
I think Mr. Markle can say what he wants. He has First Amendment rights. I'm sorry.
I can,
If he has an opinion, I think he can express it. We may not agree with his opinion. And it could come back to haunt, but,
thank you, trustee Smith, appreciate it.
you know, but he has the right to say it if he feels it. So I feel like I have a question that would get to the question he has for Dan Reed. If I might just do a quick pivot to ask a question that would take care of what trustee Markle's concern is about estimating labor, because we've all had to do it.
Oh,
But I will not make a motion.
Not just labor, I mean, we can't make motions. So we're not in session.
Right, well, I'd like to ask a question of Dan Reed that, anyway, I am not gonna make a motion that we stop in 5 minutes.
There's no motion.
I just don't feel that's necessary, and we should continue the discussion. Because I think,
Trustee Smith, go ahead and ask your question.
my question is, and I think Mr. Reardon was getting at it, if you go with square footage, you don't have to invoke the labor estimate, correct?
The square footage is the value, and that's the key word, value, not cost. Okay, so it is assuming that there's labor involved in the whole project.
So no necessity to do the materials, because the building code says building permit valuation. If we did a square footage approach, that covers valuation period.
But that's in new construction, so something like Mr. Markle's project, and, you know, please don't make this personal, because it isn't personal for me either. I think it's important that city employees and everybody else be right above board. So let me give you an example with this. Your permit, $2,000 for your mini split was $120.25. Then what I said, well, in the fair way, I think, is to take the materials and then double them and assume the labor value is equal to the materials. So think about this, and this, I know you want to stick to this, but we need a consistent policy. So you gave me a value of $1,600 for your equipment. And if we doubled that and said, okay, the value of the project is $3,200, your permit would have been $151. $31 more, but it was a point of being consistent. It's also a point that, you know, I'm trying to protect the town. The town is paying my company for me to go to these inspections. And I don't want the town to be losing money every time I'm here. So I'm just trying to find a way to be consistent and fair.
Yeah, that was my intent as well, is to find some kind of, rather than say, well, let's imagine a thing, and if it's double the, you know, the equipment cost, then that's what it is. But that's, you know, I just think that decision needs to be made by the board, or, you know, by some way that's in a consistent, predictable fashion, so that like I don't have to come up with an imaginary company that doesn't exist and find out what their fees are and do that. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. So that was my attempt at, with this discussion. But,
And there will always be those situations where Morgan says, hey, my sister-in-law just gave me this brand new boiler, so my cost for materials is nothing. Well, the town is gonna pay me to review the project, pay me to do the inspections, and we're gonna say, oh, your permit is zero because your sister-in-law did the work and your mother-in-law gave you the boiler. Like, come on, I mean, we need a way, so just trying to be consistent, and that's part of what this work session is about. And it isn't picking on a town board member or a town employee or a particular citizen. It's just, it's a good policy. We've got some outstanding issues, violations, and how do we deal with them, expired permits and stuff. So it's really good to get this ironed out.
So we just need consistent policies that are enforced across.
Yep.
Okay. Can we then move on to Ms. Kusmeyer and the time that we have left?
Okay, I'm gonna do the broad brush.
Okay.
So on land use, I would say, that you're gonna hear from all of us reasons why you need to rewrite your code as soon as possible. You've already heard that, so I'm not gonna get into that because there's some things, for instance, I think you need to break down your subdivision fees because you need to have a fee for a site-specific development review so that you can comply with vested rights law and all that stuff, which we don't have yet, but, right now you just have one major subdivision review fee. What I saw that I liked is that you have plus actual costs, but we are not charging them. So, that's something I think you need to work on. And when you do that, you need a definition of what actual costs are. It's usually gross, per hour costs, not just the person's hourly rate, but you know, their benefit, their gross pay, and then whatever costs go into that. And you are set up that way if you should decide at a later point to have a land use consultant to recover those costs. I don't know if Stephen's going to want to take that on or not, but you're already set up to handle that. There's a few terms that we use in our fee schedule that I don't understand. I think an LDR amendment has to do with what? Does anybody know what an LDR? I'm pretty sure that has to do with the site-specific flood study. But those kinds of things have to be spelled out, because if I have to say, what's an LDR amendment, that's not good. So there's some things that just have to be attended to the way we describe things. So if people come to town, and I think I've mentioned to you on the school, I've had 2 California developers and a Florida developer call. You are getting people from outside of Paonia looking. Somebody went to buy some of our town property, so you're on the map. There's a floodplain variance. I am not sure what that is, and I would recommend against floodplain variances, because the moment you start tampering with FEMA's map and you give somebody a variance, you may remove their ability to make a claim with their insurance, which is the whole purpose of it. So those are things we can do with the code change. For fees in lieu, just some ones of note that I noticed. Silt has a fee in lieu to buy new water rights as they get new development, which I've never seen before, but is a tremendously great idea.
Rifle does it too.
Yeah, oh, Rifle does it too. Rifle's above our pay grade, so I didn't include them. Yeah, so I thought that was a great idea. Park and lieu's are very common. So that's just basically a developer comes in, wants to build a 10-unit subdivision. They have to pay a certain amount that goes toward eventually you buying parkland. The one thing that I think you really need to work on, and I've already talked with Stephen about this, is that we disbanded our downtown park and lieu fee. Right now, people have no way to change their uses on their buildings because they cannot provide parking. And the way our parking code is written, they just can't meet it. There's no way for them to meet it. So that's something I think you should reinstate, is that parking district and collect fees. I will tell you that in 1985, when I first joined Glenwood Springs as community development director, we were collecting that fee, and they have now built a 2-story parking garage with that money. So, and that was decades of collections, but that's what they go for. You know, there are transportation impact fees to be able to build new roads. There are widen roads. Hopefully you're never in that circumstance. Storm drainage. There's all kinds of impact fees. There's one city I thought was kind of interesting. They have a one-size-fits-all. They just charge $5,000 per unit for an impact fee. Now, how you do a study for that, I don't know. But maybe they've just not had it challenged yet. For animal control, we're about in there. We give more breaks, like we give a break for if you have an early registration. I didn't see anybody else do that. We have a service dog break, but we're kind of in the ballpark for that. Administrative services, some of those are set by state. I think that 25-cent copy thing, everybody has that because it's set by the state. And the other thing I noticed is that 2 groups had the same per hour rate for core requests. My guess is that's also set by state statute, and then it goes up every year. So when you do your fee ordinance, you might want to tie it to whatever that state escalator is, so it automatically goes up and you don't have to change it every year. I mean, color copies, people are charging 75%. I think it probably costs us $1, so I would stick with that. The one thing that I think for attorney review of public records request, if you get that you should be charging actual costs for what you're paying your attorney. And I don't know that we're doing that. We have had, Nick had been involved in court requests, so I think that's something that we should probably do. Insufficient funds. Now, I know this is the really controversial one. I have heard to not talk about business licenses. I think we are the only town that I could find that is not charging a business license fee, and you don't have to charge a big one. I mean, Crestone, that's a significant amount of revenue for them, and they're only charging $25 per business license. So I really think you might want to consider that, even though it's controversial. Let's see, everybody's got late fees, and I don't know what the late fees are in the clerk's office, but there must be something. Let's see, community center fees, I mean, that's probably worth in the budget, looking how much it costs. And the one thing that I've already preached to you is that I think for community center and park deposits, they have to be substantial. Otherwise, people will default on them and let you clean up their mess. Let's see. The one thing I saw, and this has become an issue for us, and then we cut to the end, is the one town, I think Silt and Meeker also set fees for renting their heavy equipment or paying their employees to do the work with their heavy equipment. We actually had a request, I think it was last week, to rent our equipment. I would strongly urge you not to get involved in that business because of insurance. I mean, you might be able to make a lot of money. There is one reason to set hourly rates though for employees and equipment is if you ever have to make a FEMA claim, you have to have those. But I talked to Corey about this request that we had, and we just decided there's no way we're going to rent. First of all, we don't have great equipment. I mean, it's not in top notch. We'd like to replace it anyway, but that's just my overall recommendation. For marijuana and liquor, that's really, I think you have to kind of stay within the state statute. And since Sam isn't here, I can't really comment on whether our fees are up to snuff or not. They're about in the ballpark. But that's something I think that you should look into further when Sam gets back, get a recommendation for her for that. And then I do think that you need to set your fees, your gross fees per hour for staff. So when you're charging actual costs, you have a consistent basis for which to charge them. The one thing I saw that I think you might want to add, because, and I think Dan knows this story better than me and he know this story. So we have a couple of people in town that it is like pulling teeth to get the information that we need to do the review. And what's happened for me is I have to do the zoning review, and a recent one I did, I don't know how many emails I sent to try and get the information that I could do the darn zoning review. And it would have taken me 10 minutes had I had the information, but I probably spent at least 45 minutes trying to get this information. I actually asked for a floor plan. I finally got a floor plan after I think about 6 requests without dimensions. So for those people, it would be great to be able to charge a fee, maybe an actual cost fee, so they would be motivated to give you the information right at the beginning, and you didn't have to fight with them. But that's something you might want to add on, because I've spent a lot of time this year, particularly with this one party that doesn't like to give us information. And well, there's 2. We won't name names. It might cut down, they'd be encouraged to give you the full plans and all the information you need to do the zoning review. So that's kind of my big picture thing. And I wanted to mention that Stephen and I talked about this today, and I told him when I first came to Colorado in 1985, in Glenwood Springs, the first project they gave me was to redo their sign code. And so to Stephen, I give to redo the fees. Both are projects that are just really easy, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you, everyone, for putting all the work in you did on the fees. I mean, thank you for all the information, and you took a lot of time to work on this, so thanks a lot. All right, we're gonna take a 11-minute break.